I don't deserve this happiness. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Paradise Syndrome, which is episode 3 of Season 3 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. Sorry. One episode at a time. And in this video, I will cover the episode The Paradise Syndrome. So the Paradise Syndrome is the episode where Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are investigating a planet that is about to be pulverized by an asteroid. They find this weird alien technology, but living there is a group of Native Americans from Earth who obviously do not possess this technology and is still very much unaware of the danger that they're in. However, while Kirk is investigating the strange device, he falls into it, and then Spock and the crew can't find him, and they need to leave to go destroy the asteroid, because if they don't leave immediately, they might not get the chance to destroy the asteroid, and it will destroy the planet. So they leave Kirk alone, and he wakes up inside the weird alien device, which wipes his memory, gives him amnesia, and he's thrown back out into the out of the monument where the Native Americans discover him and think he's a god. So they make him the medicine man. He marries the chieftain's daughter, and then when the world is about to be destroyed, he is unable, of course, to stop the winds and the weathers and the earthquakes, and thus they deem that he's a false god. They all stone him and his wife to death. But then Spock and McCoy arrive just in time, enough to save Kirk, but not his wife, who's pregnant with his child but has died of the stoning. However, Kirk regains his memories thanks to a mind meld, and they team up to use this strange alien device to destroy the asteroid and save the world. So, I never liked this episode. I always thought it was boring. Even when I was a little youngster, when I was first watching this. Now, there are episodes of Star Trek that I didn't like when I first saw them when I was a young teenager, that because I thought they were boring, that I changed my mind. I was too young, and I didn't really understand like the character story involved and how great it was. For me, the best and most prime example is the Next Generation episode, The Inner Light, which I never really paid attention to, and I thought, well, this is just another boring episode. And now it is my favorite Next Generation episode. I love it to death. And that opinion came with, growing older and learning the sophistication and the character stories and what was involved, stuff that was kind of lost to me at a young age. However, with this episode, whoa. Hi, Holden. He wants to be in the video. Anyway, with this episode, I like it even less. I like it even less than what I did when I was younger. Growing older made me see that this episode is actually more than just boring. It's racist, and it's terrible, and features horrible acting. So age has made my opinion of this episode go down, not up, as it has with several other examples of episode I found boring as a teenager. Now, it's interesting I bring up The Inner Light because a lot of people have been comparing it to The Inner Light. So this episode seems to be, I don't know, I was going to say well-liked, but I think it's more accurate to say a segment really likes this episode. When I went on to IMDb and I was looking at the reviews, the majority of the reviews were like really positive, like 10 out of 10, the user reviews, that is 10 out of 10 and 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, great episode. And then I looked up his overall like average score that every person could rate the episode. I myself did. I think I gave it a 1. But every user can rate the episode and averages out the score, and the score was actually low. Even though those who took the time to write reviews had great things to say about it, it was, when I looked it up, it was like the 14th lowest rated episode of the original series on IMDb, and that's a low rating. Still is rated higher than Alternative Factor, but don't get me started on that. But anyway, but I was just reading this book that I got recently that has all these quotes from people attached to Star Trek, and I was reading about the third season of the original series, and several people, including the writer of this episode, obviously, said this episode was great. In fact, even the authors of the book said, season 3 was panned as being a bad season, but there were some good episodes, and they listed this amongst them. Like, their list of what was considered good episodes of season 3 is very different than my list. I think the Tholian Web was the only one that we actually agreed on. Like, they said the Cloud Miners was not very good. That's one of my favorites of season 3. They also mentioned All Our Yesterday, so we agree on that. But they mentioned Turnabout Intruder, and I'm like, what the ever-loving fuck? But to be fair, in that book there were some quotes of other people who they were quoting that says Turnabout Intruder was terrible, including Scott Mance, a critic that I recognize, and pointing out how sexist it was. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about Turnabout Intruder. And there were quotes from several people, not just the writer of this episode, who pointed out this is one of the best episodes of season 3. And like, in what reality? Like, I always considered this one of the worst episodes of season 3. Always. Now, the writer of the episode was critical of the showrunner at the time, Fred, what's his name? Freiberger or something like that? Freiberger. No. Anyway, he was the showrunner in season 3. Gene Roddenberry kind of bowed out and did more of a ceremonious role, although he was still somewhat involved. But Fred was the main showrunner of season 3, and a lot of people blame him for why season 3 was terrible and why the quality went down. And he was talking about how he thinks he's being treated unfairly, that he thought he did a good job, that a lot of the things that specific people are complaining about was actually the fault of Gene Roddenberry, because Gene Roddenberry wanted the show to focus more on romance, or that was more of a studio note, actually, because they were trying to attract the female demographic. And season 3 was said to be more serious, not really doing any comedies. That was a note from Gene Roddenberry. And also season 3 was trying to make each episode as standalone as possible and like reiterate what everyone's job position was. I didn't even notice season 3 was doing this. Apparently in the first act of a lot of episodes, Kirk would call Scotty engineer instead of Mr. Scott, and they would call Spock, science officer, just so if you're watching this for the first time, you're like, so that's what he does on the ship. I didn't even notice that, but apparently a lot of people were blaming him for that, and he was saying that's actually Roddenberry. He wanted to do that kind of thing. And I'll talk more about him as I delve into season 3. But point is, he didn't want to do this episode. Gene Roddenberry was the one who okayed this episode. He thought this episode was a bit too hokey. Now, the writer was talking about that like it was a negative thing, like he's a bad producer, bad showrunner, because he just wanted action, suspense, and things blowing up, and he didn't understand a great character story. And it was Roddenberry who could see the value of a great character story. But you know what? I agree with him. I think I side with him over Roddenberry. I think they shouldn't have done this episode. I think this episode's terrible. Now, it's not that it's a good character. It has nothing to do with character stories. I love character stories. If you know me, if a story is not focused on the characters, doesn't have good character stories, I'm not into it. And what I focus on more and the stuff I like the most is good character stories. This is not a good character story. This is not a good character story. I'll get into all the ham acting, don't you worry. But anyway, so this is not a good character story. This is, I see what they tried to do, and the concept of what they tried to do is similar to The Inner Light, which is why I know a lot of people compare the episode. In fact, some of the positive reviews are saying, this is the original series, The Inner Light, except this sucks, and The Inner Light was one of the best Star Trek episodes ever made. So, not really the same thing. But they were trying to, functionally, they were trying to do the same thing. It's just this episode failed miserably, and The Inner Light succeeded with flying colors. And what they were trying to do was present the scenario where Kirk had a different life, that he wasn't a starship captain, that he had, was a family man with a wife and a child on the way, and that he was happy, and it was his version of paradise, because he wasn't really aware of, the starship thing, and there was something eating at him about the starship thing, but paradise right in front of him, he wanted to stay at. And I think that's an interesting concept, to be fair. Like, I think there's nothing wrong with the concept. There's a lot wrong with the execution of that concept in this episode. Okay, so now let me get into this. The racism. Now, I've talked about this episode before, and I kind of sort of, not entirely, but just a little bit, excused the racism because it was commonplace in the 60s, and it was. There's a lot of westerns that would portray Native Americans like dumb savages, and so. And I will give that to this show. I will give them that slight excuse that they're just doing what everyone else is doing. But, I mean, that doesn't make it not racist. That doesn't make it, okay. It definitely does not. It's still terrible and shameful, and I don't give a fuck that it was made in the 60s. It doesn't matter when it was made. It's terrible. But I will give them that slight excuse that, well, they're just doing what everyone else was doing at the time in 60s television. And the thing is that, and someone else, I read this review that was, bashing of just how racist this show was, because it named, Spock named, these are members of several tribes, the Delaware, the Mohicans, and he mentioned one other. And, someone's pointing out that, these tribes never got along. Sometimes they even warred with each other, and they're nothing alike. And they should have been dressed differently. How they were dressed is absolutely nothing like how those tribes actually were costumed. And so saying that someone should have, actually, hey, maybe doing some fucking research and actually tried to present the tribe, tried to get them to act like they would have really act and dress like they really would have dressed. In fact, I believe I remember reading there was a letter sent from a Native American community as before this episode was aired, going to, the producers Roddenberry and Friedberger, anyway, going to him and saying that, pleading with them to, change this representation of Native Americans, but they did not. And the other thing that this article I read pointed out was, of course, the way that they talked. They talked in this broken English, like me want weather to be good or whatever. And And they were like, and this article didn't understand the concept of universal translator because they were like, why are they speaking English? I mean, if they were speaking English the whole time, then they should be speaking good English because that's what they always speak. But it's actually the universal translator. It's not that they're speaking English, it's that the universal translator is translating it to English for us, the audience, thank God, so we can understand it. And presumably to Kirk as well. Yeah, the universal translator is just a convenient excuse to explain why all the aliens speak English. But anyway, not here to talk about that. But let's go with it. So the universal translator is translating this to English from their native language. So why is it broken English? And I'll tell you why. Because it still shouldn't be broken English. If the universal translator is translating it from their language and they're speaking their language fluently, then they should be speaking English fluently. Because that's what the universal translator does. So, but I'll tell you why it's in broken English, because that was a signature. That's how a lot of the TV watching audience recognize Native Americans. That's how they were presented in all of these westerns. It was a trope. It was a cliche. It was that western I saw randomly one time. It was like, me dumb savage, me don't know anything. Like they always were presented to talk that way, and that the audience was trained to identify that as a trait of Native Americans. So when they showed these Native Americans in this episode, if they didn't have them talk that way, then their dumb audience, or at least this is probably the perspective of the producers of this episode, their dumb audience would be like, well, they're not Native Americans. They're weird. They're not speaking broken English. They're not really Indians. So that's why they're doing that, even though the article is correct in pointing out that doesn't make any sense. So, and obviously, and then there's the way that they behave is seen as really primitive and dumb. They don't understand concepts like irrigation or preserving, which, by the way, Native Americans actually did. And they had to, and they think that the gods are doing this, and they think that Kirk is a god just because he appeared in the temple, and they stone him to death when they don't understand why he can't make the weather turn good, and just all these little things. It's portraying them as dumb savages, basically. It's a very, very racist portrayal. So, and I think, I wouldn't have had as big of an issue with this episode if this was some alien. Now, I might have some of the issue if they made it too obvious that the alien was a stand-in for Native Americans, such as the episode like Friday's Child and A Private Little War, well, especially Friday's Child, where it was very obvious that the aliens there were just stand-ins for Native Americans, although that episode didn't portray them as terribly as this episode does. And this episode was blatant that they're Native Americans. But, so they probably either should have, probably shouldn't have made them so dumb. And if they did, completely 86 any Native American analogies whatsoever and make them totally different. But even then, it's, kind of questionable. But they blatantly said it. Not only did they do an analogy, they blatantly said these are Native Americans and just portrayed them as, primitive morons, which, as I said, extremely racist. And it's funny to me how obtuse, the writer and the other people who are praising this episode are for the fact of how freaking racist this episode is. Now, granted, there's a lot of audience, and especially critics today, that recognize that, which is, I imagine, part of the reason why it has such a low rating on IMDb. But yeah. So there's that, and there's the fact the amnesia storyline. I gotta bring up my sister because she absolutely hates this trope to death, and I don't. There's some amnesia storylines I do like. I like the one they did in TNG with Data. Thine Own Self, and I like the one they did with the Voyager crew and Workforce. And actually, someone else pointed out this episode to Workforce and saying, isn't it funny that a Voyager episodes actually did the same concept of the original series and did it way, way better. They're like, that never happens. But yeah, definitely happened here. So I don't have as big of an issue with the amnesia trope, but unless when it's done very poorly, like this episode for prime example, when it's done extremely poorly, and it just comes off as extremely cliche, and it's just an excuse to have Kirok stay on the planet. Yeah, the whole Kirok thing is dumb anyway. And then they had the other cliche of the jealous boyfriend who was going to marry Miramani until Kirk came along and she just dumped him outright and said, well, fuck that, I'll marry this god. And fair enough. But, yeah, the jealous boyfriend trope, and I mentioned this before in another video, but for some reason that actor... none of these actors who portray the Native Americans are, by the way, Native Americans. Are all European. But anyway, that actor reminded me a lot of John Lovitz for some reason. Even though I know logically it's obviously not John Lovitz. The comedian from Saturday Night Live. Yeah, that's the ticket. Anyway, the critic. That's animated show. But anyway, reminds me of him for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, yeah, that whole storyline was dumb. The way that Kirk is treated like a god was dumb. I never bought the reason why Miramani loves Kirk is kind of just thrown in there as oh, he knows CPR, so I'm gonna boink his brains out. I don't know. It wasn't done very well, but I will say the actual romantic scenes with Kirk and Miramani I thought were done well. And again, I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to do, a story about Kirk falling in love, becoming a family man, and how different that was for his life on the Enterprise. They were trying to do this. They just, everything around it was just so contrived and dumb. And okay, I think now I'm going to get into Kirk's overacting. It was absolutely terrible in this episode. And it's funny because I was reading this book and a lot of people were praising William Shatner's acting, particularly those who liked the episode Turnabout Intruder. They said it was good because William Shatner's acting was so good. And I'm like, William Shatner's acting was fucking terrible in that episode. Some of the worst acting I've seen in my life. What the hell is wrong with you? Anyway, again, I'm not talking about Turnabout Intruder, but still, I want to make these people like Bart Simpson style, go on a chalkboard. How at the opening credits of The Simpsons, he's writing the same sentence over and over and over again on the chalkboard. I want to make them do that with William Shatner is a terrible actor. William Shatner is a terrible actor. He's not good. He's not good, especially in this episode. I kept pointing out, okay, here's the one scene I got to point out. It was so terrible, it made me laugh. This is the first episode I recall where they actually they might have done this before. No, I think they do it later in the Cloud Miners, but I don't know if they've done it before this episode, but it's the first one where they have eternal monologue other than Captain's Log. Different from the Captain's Log. It's just you're hearing what Kirk is thinking on the spot. And they have, because when he first loses his memory, you can hear him saying, "Who am I? Where am I? What are these strange things?" But anyway, later in the episode, after he gets married, and he talks about, and you hear his inner monologue saying, "I am so happy. This is the happiest I've ever been." And as that monologue is playing, you see William Shatner go had this totally fake smile, I'm so happy. And he even hugs himself. He's like, "Oh, I'm so happy." It was the cheesiest goddamn thing I've ever seen, and I was laughing my ass off at it. William Shatner's acting is terrible! Terrible, repeat after me. William Shatner is a bad actor. Anyway. And that scene I quoted at the start of my video, again, is another one I noticed where it's like, more money! I don't deserve to be this happy. Like, the whole conversation he was doing that pausing bullshit. Bad actor. Bad! Anyway. So then there's the Spock and McCoy storyline. This is another case of McCoy being annoying as fuck to Spock. Every time they go off without Kirk, but McCoy just has to be such an annoying little prick and just go up to Spock and say, Spock, why did you do this? You're destroying us all. You left Jim there. Why are you doing this asteroid? You left us all to die. Blah, blah, blah. I just want to punch him in the face and be like, shut the fuck up and do your goddamn job. But anyway, so Spock goes to destroy this asteroid. So he fires a bunch of phasers at it, like repeatedly, and Scotty's like, don't overtax the engines, and Spock's like, well, we gotta destroy this asteroid. So he shoots phasers like for like a minute or whatever, and then like the whole engines like wear out and they have no warp speed. And then Scotty says, it's going to be impossible for us to repair the warp engines unless we go to the starbase. So my first question is, how do they repair the warp engines? They can't get to it would take them like decades to get to a starbase on Impulse. I guess if they still have communications, they probably call for a ship to come and tow them to the nearest starbase. I suppose that's what happened. But my bigger issue, though, my bigger point is, firing phasers for like a minute should not destroy your warp engines. And if it could, like, you think they would keep a closer eye on that to make sure that wouldn't happen. But it shouldn't happen. Like, the warp engines should not be that fragile. Just by firing phasers will make them like burn out. Like, they're not even using warp drive to fire phasers. Like, that doesn't make any sense. They're two totally different systems. And it was such a contrived nonsense just so they could have it so the Enterprise would take 2 months to get back to the planet so Kirk could live out his, I'm so happy life with Miramani. It was contrived bullshit. It was contrived nonsense. And then Spock was studying these, the symbols on the artifact, and it just so happens that he managed to crack them 2 hours before they actually arrived on the planet, when they've been trying at it for 2 months. That whole thing was so contrived. It just hurts me. It hurts me how contrived that was. But anyway, so they get back to the planet, and as I said, Kirk is getting stoned. Well, he's not it's not this what's it, this side of paradise? Not that kind of stone where a flower pops up out of nowhere and goes boom, and snipers him, makes him you go, oh, look at the clouds, man. Not that kind of stone. The Native Americans are throwing stones at him. And so they're stoning him to death, and he's like, and Miramani is yelling at them to stop, but the John Levis jealous boyfriend is like, no, he's a false god, we need to kill him. And she's like, no, stop it. And they're like, fine, go be with him. And so she went up with him. They started stoning her to death too, and Kirk sort of shielded her and was like, no, don't, you'll be killed too. And then shortly thereafter, Spock and McCoy beam down, so they all run away, probably because they're like, oh fuck, what if he was a god? Shit. But anyway, it would be cool if it wasn't so goddamn racist. But anyway, So Spock and McCoy go up to Kirk and Miramoney, and they're able to save Kirk's life, but Miramoney dies. That makes zero sense. Zero sense. Because Kirk was getting stoned for way longer than she was. She actually barely got any stones thrown at her at all, because at first Kirk was shielding her, and she was only up there for like 10 seconds, where Kirk was getting stoned for like a minute or two straight. And yet she's the one who dies as opposed to Kirk. So her death is another bit of contrived nonsense. Obviously, they can't have her live because she has Kirk's child. She's bearing Kirk's child. So if Kirk just goes back to fucks off back to the Enterprise, then that speaks very ill of our hero, and it taints his pristine image that he would just abandon his own child, son or daughter like that, which, you know, Star Trek 2 is excused because he didn't know his son existed, but still. That would taint our great hero, so we can't have that, so we got to kill her off. And apparently, yeah, and this is another thing that some critics rightfully criticized. And apparently it was in the original script, she survived, but then they changed that script because someone probably realized, well, no, we can't have that, because what we're going to do, have Kirk stay behind on the planet? We can't have that. We're going to have her come up to the Enterprise? No, we can't have that. Are we going to have Kirk just fuck off and abandon his own only child? No, we can't have that either. And we need no continuity, so we can't actually mention this ever again. So we got to kill her off. But it's the way that they did kill her off, like getting stones thrown at her for like 10 seconds as opposed to the 2 minutes Kirk had the stones thrown at him. It makes zero sense. So it's contrived bullshit nonsense. Now, that being said, this is the only part of the episode I actually liked, was her death. Because as dumb as I thought the romance was, I thought the scenes with them together were that they did actually have good chemistry together. That I could buy that these were two people in love. And when Kirk had to face the fact and say his dying words, or listen to the dying words from his wife and his unborn child who will never be born, was very tragic. And I think, as much as again, I'm not going to retract what I said about William Shatner being a terrible actor. He's a fucking terrible actor. But as much as I say that, I think he actually did a good job in this one scene. Portraying what it was like for him to watch his wife die. So, I did like that scene, but not enough for me to like this episode. It's enough for me to save this episode for me giving it a 1. I will say that, because it was definitely on its way for a 1. But that scene was marginally good enough to be like, okay, that was a good scene, and I did find it kind of touching. But other than that, this episode's terrible. So, and now let me talk. I want to talk about the Preservers, because this is another thing that's mentioned in this episode, that the Preservers were the ones who created this. There's some unknown advanced alien species that created this outpost that conveniently was there to destroy asteroids. It seems like it was his only point. Like, how did it know there would be asteroids coming towards? But anyway, they apparently took indigenous cultures that were in danger of becoming extinct and transported them to other planets, and Spock theorized that that's probably why they encountered so many humanoids throughout the galaxy. And I even read a review. It was like, oh, it's a good thing they mentioned and explained why there's so many humanoids throughout the galaxy. But no, it's not. It's those fucking changeling weird aliens from the Chase. They're the ones that planted all the humanoid DNA throughout the galaxy. But anyway, yeah, and I've heard like a lot of theories and maybe some novels and stuff that mentioned the Preservers. People were thinking, even some modern Trek, there's like, oh, I wonder if it's going to be the Preservers, or going to bring the Preservers back in. But the Preservers is bullshit. Like, I don't think they should ever be mentioned ever again. The whole concept is dumb, and just, we don't know who they are. It was just a contrived nonsense so there could be this asteroid destroyer on this planet. So I don't really want to see the Preservers, nor do I ever want to hear them mentioned ever again. The whole concept is dumb. I'm okay with those founder-looking aliens from the chase. Anyway, so now let me thank some of my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. That is, if my fucking mouse decides to work. Okay. Sorry, I usually try to delay while I bring up this list, because I never remember to bring up the list beforehand. Well, not never. Sometimes I do, but not enough. Anyway, yes, the Patreon supporters very much appreciate it. Really helps the channel. Really helps me to keep going. So we have Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Brian A., Alessandro Megalacio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Nealhouse. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few patron comments on this episode. Let's see. First comment is from Ricky, who says, yeah, this episode is so boring. I mean, come on. We've seen the storyline so many countless times where the main character gets injured and has amnesia, then falls in love, then the other characters find a way to retrieve him and fix his memory. I just don't find the premise interesting. And to top it off with the racism in this episode portraying American Indians as dumb and gullible was so offensive. Also, the B plot with Spock and McCoy was also annoying. I really didn't like these scenes, so my rating is a 2 out of 10. And again, as always, me and Ricky always on the same page. So next comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, The Paradise Syndrome, another gem from the pen of Margaret Arman, who gave us The Gamesters of Triskelion. The original title for this episode was The Paleface. And the planet never named was Amrind. Even writing this is making me cringe. I'm bored shitless with parallel Earths and white saviors. I do find the Kirok and Mirror Mind love story to be touching because Kirk isn't acting like Kirk the Womanizer. The Enterprise trying to destroy the asteroid, the towing is back to the planet was boring and unintentionally hilarious. And by the way, Kirok's wife and child die. Also, what the fuck is a Vulcan mind meld fusion? For Scotty saying, my Barnes, my poor Barnes, out of 10. I agree about the Kirk romance, that he wasn't actually acting like a womanizer in this episode. And so it did feel different. It didn't feel as cliche and as cringy as most of the Kirk romances. So maybe that's why I kind of liked it a little bit. But, yeah. The one thing I did want to talk about was the white savior trope. That is something a lot of people did bring up. Another reason why this episode's racist is because it does the white savior trope where the poor natives have to be saved by the great white man, who of course is the only one who knows how to make lamps and do irrigations because all the natives are dumb. So that was quite offensive, but I already talked about that. But anyway, my rating for the Paradise Syndrome out of 10 is a 2. Extremely poor. As I said, this episode nearly gets a 1 for its racism, for its terrible Kirk acting. William Shatner, bad actor. He's a bad actor. The stupid cliche amnesia and jealous boyfriend storylines. The Enterprise storyline being so contrived and not making any sense and just being why is their engines going to short out just for frying faces? That's dumb. So this episode is, in my opinion, one of the worst, and plus it's boring. I still state, like, that was my chief reason for not liking this episode back when I was a teenager, and I think that stands. This episode is boring and hard to get through, and I don't like watching it. And so I think this is easily one of the worst of the show, and I would give this a 1 if it wasn't for that ending where where Miramani dies. Even though that's contrived as well, the fact that she dies, but the death scene itself was actually kind of touching, and I think it was written well, performed well. So I will be generous in my generosity. I will give this episode a 2 instead of a 1. But yeah, it's still absolutely terrible. I can't believe some people named this as one of the best of season 3. What is wrong with people? Anyway, and I thought this episode was better than the Cloud Miners. Like, in what reality? But anyway, sorry. And that is it for my review of the Paradise Syndrome. So coming up next on Enchantment of Eternity, this Wednesday will be my review for the Enterprise Incident, which will go live on my channel on Thursday. May the 4th be with you. Thursday, May the 4th, I will do my usual annual Star Wars movie reviews for May the 4th, and this year we'll be covering Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And then Saturday, back here with another TOS review, and The Children Shall Lead, another gem of an episode. And then on Monday, we'll be back over on Patreon for another revisited. This revisited for the episode Spock's Brain, which I can revisit my review for that beloved, excellent episode. So that is, so that's what's coming up on my channel. I also cover many other Star Trek videos and many videos on other shows as well, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.